And here we are, January 6th, 2021. Hard to say. Ryan Ray alongside Chris Fenton. This is Beating the Dragon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Chris, we keep saying, well, we're going to do a show maybe tomorrow, but it feels like the news is breaking every night. So we keep coming back every day. We can't even skip a day anymore.
Yeah, it really is unbelievable. And in fact, I listened to our podcast yesterday just because I like to critique whether I'm terrible or not. And I was so animated yesterday, I realized I had a hot mic. So I turned it down a little bit today because this stuff animates me. It gets me super vocal about the fact that we got to get America behind what is going on here, get them understanding, engaging in it, and realizing this affects all of us, like red and blue, rich or poor. This is an issue. China, the Chinese Communist Party, is a real challenge to America. And the two of us are not pushing for war or even a Cold War, but we are pushing for a huge, dramatic reset. And if you look in history, we did the same thing between Europe and the United States of America. Europe forced us to do a massive reset when we caught up to them. That's the same kind of reset we got to push against China, and we're running out of time. There will be a point of no return where we can't address this reset. So we're out there being vocal. I myself look at my position as a populist China expert. I look at China in the way that 99% of us should, not the C-suite of different corporations or congressional members or people with all kinds of conflicts of interest in the China relationship. This is about 99% of the people, right? And I come at it as a nonpartisan patriot. So let's get started. There's a lot of news to cover.
Very good. Okay. Hong Kong. We haven't talked a ton on Hong Kong since we've been doing the show. We've hit it here and there. Let's kind of backtrack. So we've had the Hong Kong protests, which a lot of people know about. But the big thing that you're going to see with Hong Kong, since the protests have kind of been pushed aside, and was that last summer roughly, is this new Hong Kong security law, which basically, or not Hong Kong, this Chinese security law, which basically forbids anyone from saying anything at any point in time that the CCP doesn't like. And so if you're out there protesting in Hong Kong now, it's a crime. And so we've seen several crackdowns, but now we've seen, to my knowledge, the first American that was out there with the protesters caught up in this. And so obviously Trump has, 14 days, give or take. Biden's coming in. I saw Bill Bishop saying that he didn't think the timing was related to anything as far as the elections last night, and I agree with that. But I do wonder if the CCP is thinking about, okay, towards the end of one administration, you have a new one coming in. Now maybe the time to kind of stir things up a little bit more and kind of catch the back end of one and the start of the other.
Yeah, there's so much to uncover in this situation. I mean, I can go back to when I was in China and in Hong Kong with 3 congressional members last August of 2019, not 2020. And we actually went down to Hong Kong. It was Congressman Lowenthal, Congresswoman Titus, and Congresswoman Kirkpatrick. And we met with protesters and we met with Carrie Lam. And it seemed as if the United States of America had a plan to try to prevent the CCP from encroaching on Hong Kong in a way to take over that administrative region in a way that was 27 years ahead of what they promised the UK. It seemed like we had the pressure, the influence. The Trump administration was pushing to make sure that the people of Hong Kong were protected from that encroachment and that takeover. And then suddenly, boom, we got distracted. It was whether it was COVID, whether it was the bifurcation of the country, the politicism of what's going on here, sort of this, quasi civil war going on in this country. We got completely distracted. China went in there, took over Hong Kong. And as we saw last night, it is never going to be the same. And if you look at what went down, not only did they crack down on their own citizens for breaking that national security law, but there's a name of an American lawyer named John Clancy. I don't know much about him, but I have a feeling we're going to hear a lot more of that name coming up here. And he was taken down in that crackdown last night too. And I was watching Twitter as this was unfolding, as we were all distracted watching the Georgia runoff, obviously. And people were saying, well, how could they do this? What happened? Like, we need to push back. And you bring up Bill Bishop earlier, and I love this tweet that he sent to somebody asking those questions. He said, Well, why wouldn't the CCP do what they just did? There's no price to pay. Merkel and the EU don't care. And even if they did, there's little they can do. The US has applied basically toothless sanctions. It is a PR city, just like Shenzhen and Guangzhou now, but we have a convertible currency, grim times. And I thought that said it exactly right on.
There was a time earlier, forget you're in 2021. There was a time last year where I felt like the global community could have saved Hong Kong, for lack of a better term. They didn't, and now it feels like it's gone. Like there was a few week period where I thought, okay, maybe they can crack down, maybe they can push back. They didn't do it, and it feels like the cat's at the bag. The chickens are out the farm, like whatever term you want to use. I think Hong Kong, we need to realize in the West, it's a settled issue now, as far as the U.S. being able to get back the economy that they had.
Look, I mean, if you just use symbolism of like a fox in a hen house. I mean, we saw it last summer as the protests started. They started pushing the PLA and the PAP, the People's Armed Police, down towards the border to show a sign of threat. They moved in a station for the high-speed rail that was actually a zone that was considered the PRC versus the one country, two systems policy of Hong Kong. We started to see people disappear. In a way, we saw the foxes come up to the hen house. Then we saw one or two leak in there. We started to say, hey, that's not allowed. We're going to put all kinds of different sanctions on your companies. We're going to threaten this, threaten that. Nothing came through. Then suddenly we got diverted. The foxes that got in opened the door, and the rest of the foxes got in there, and now the hens are gone. That is a done deal. So now the next thing we got to think about is, when are they going to make the move on Taiwan? That is the next one on the docket for the CCP.
Let's talk about Taiwan for a second. Do you think they're that brave? And you think, like, because to me, there's a line in the sand. Hong Kong is internalized. It's on the mainland China. Going to Taiwan is like that's a different level. And I don't. I mean, I'm not as prone to think that they're going to go to that level. Do you think so? Do you think it's probably likely? I should say.
I don't know. I lectured at the National War College last year, and I'm honored to do it again this semester, which is great. And there was a big topic about how pretty much our Pentagon thought that in 2020 that move into Taiwan was going to take place. But because it was delayed until the late fall, the Taiwan Strait, which apparently has extremely rough seas, prevents any sort of land invasion opportunity for the PRC to do with their PLA. So they felt like that was a sigh of relief in regards to a longer timeline as to when this invasion would happen. And it can't happen again until probably sometime in April, I guess, or May, when the straits start to calm down. Whether it happens or not, who knows? But I do know that the Pentagon is preparing for it to happen. And then the question is, what do we do about it? What does Taiwan do about it? Because let's face it, they don't have the best military in the world. What does the United States do about it? And then more importantly, what do our allies in the region do about it? Can we count on Japan to do something, or South Korea, or even Australia? I mean, if we can't bring allies into it, and this is one unilateral sort of operation, this is going to be a real problem for us as a country.
My understanding is, according to Mark Rosano, that we've given Taiwan more or less 2 weeks of military kind of prevention, so they can kind of withstand the invasion, if you will, for about 2 weeks before we could get there to help, if it did come to that. I'm still skeptical of that. I think for Xi Jinping to make that move, you think a chess strategy. Well, I know the Chinese like Go, not chess, but chess strategy. Like, you're in the end game then, because theoretically, if you do go to Taiwan, the West could respond, and we're not going to nuclear war, which is, there's no threat of that. But you could have a serious battle on your hands, and it could be the end of the CCP globally, more or less, because then the nations would turn all of their lending, all the probably talk about globally would be amplified, 100x. If we just gave up Taiwan, though, then there's no stopping them, right? Like if we cede Taiwan, then what else? There's no reason to stop them anywhere else. And so it's a line in the sand. I don't think we can give it up, or we can't protect Taiwan. And God, the risk for the CCP side is so great. I just I don't know. I'm like you. I don't want to make a prediction, but I'm reluctant to think that either side really wants to find out what happens there.
Look, I would like to 100% agree with you, and I'm going to hope that what you're saying is the case. I do think the mentality of the CCP is that Taiwan is part of China, and they plan to unite all of China together again. That seems to be Xi Jinping's main directive. I would also say that the United States has had an extremely ambiguous and confusing relationship with Taiwan overall anyway. They're not allowed to have an ambassador or an embassy here. We're not allowed to have real official visits to the country. We don't really fully recognize them as a separate country. So in a way, I'm not sure if the CCP taking over Taiwan creates this domino effect of the CCP taking over all these other sovereign countries, because it's viewed differently in the eyes of the CCP and, quite frankly, the United States of America. So I don't know. This is a little out of my lane. I just think that there's a real threat. And China has seen absolutely no repercussions for anything they've done up until now.
So the thing with Taiwan for me is a lot of their aid and loans in Africa are dependent on the nation not acknowledging Taiwan as an independent nation. And so I think all but like one African nation does not acknowledge Taiwan. So if China pushes the issue and they lose, they lose. They go to try to take over Taiwan and they lose. They're pushed back. You have a lot of African nations right now that are looking for a reason to get out of debt with China. They're looking for a reason to cut the strings. A humanitarian crisis in Taiwan gives them the perfect opportunity to say, listen, whoa, hold on. And so those are the types of things that actually you see at the geopolitical level that it's common sense to all of us, but it's those chess pieces that get played. And so if they were to go to Taiwan, there are African nations who are dying for a reason to get out of this debt with China. And that would be a very natural way for them to say, this is a humanitarian crisis. What you're doing is wrong. We can't stand by this anymore. Even though they know what's going on now, it then gives them the leverage. And so especially if the U.S. repels the Chinese at Taiwan, then they could really stand behind that, say, oh my gosh, they're imperialists now. We can't stand for this. So those are the kind of messaging points that you could see globally. So that's the big risk from the CCP standpoint. If the CCP wins and takes over Taiwan, well, none of the African nations can stand up because now it is part of China, right? So you could see how it could put other nations in a bind, especially with debt, because now they can't do anything because now it's part of China. They've taken it. So not that they would then go invade African nations. It would just not give the African nations some pushback on China, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's at least how I kind of see it potentially playing out.
Look, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously this is out of my lane in the military chess game of the world, but I mean, if I look at it from the outermost peel of the onion, I'm not exactly sure if those African countries take a stand against China and said, we're not going to repay these debts, get your people out of here. Who has the wherewithal right now from the West to come in and help defend those countries if China wants to get their property and money back? Like, I don't know who's going to do that. I think a bigger issue is what the regional allies of ours do, which are Japan and South Korea, given all the different complications of the China relationship, North Korea sitting there, the Philippines sort of on the fence of who they're allied with. You got Southeast Asia that is now completely dependent on China. And then you have what's going on in India, too. I mean, India has their hands full just dealing with China by themselves. Bring Taiwan in the equation. Who knows what happens? And then you got, of course, Australia there, who's doing all kinds of interesting, I would say, pushback moves, but then at the same time, they go and make a massive trade deal with the ASEAN countries with China. So the whole thing is so conflicted and so complicated and entangled. I'm not exactly sure how it plays out, but the important part for us is to at least bring the outside of the onion to everybody else in this country to know that this is happening and to do the right kind of research and voice opinions and voice concerns to the leaders that are leading this country and figuring out what to do next.
100% agree. We'll move on. Just one quick comment. Yeah, I'm not saying that's how it will play out either. One of the things that frustrates me with geopolitical stuff is we want to get so into the weeds and make it so complicated. And I just like to point out that there are very simple, practical things that could be done in response to things that could fix a lot of problems. And instead of getting into, this dotted line here and how far over were you and fishing, there's a lot of more practical stuff that could be brought up. Okay, let's talk.
By the way, the keep it simple, stupid principle applies to almost everything in life, and even geopolitics and military chess games and so on. If you bring it to the sort of most macro level, a lot of times there's some really good solutions in there.
Okay, let's talk about we'll stay in China for a second and their aggression. Let's talk the World Health Organization. They are now saying that despite having agreed with the Chinese government to send over some doctors to go look at the origins of the virus, they were told to go home. Don't come. You're not welcome here. This is, for me, just as much of an American issue as a China issue, is that, President Trump pulled out of the World Health Organization, Biden saying he's getting back in. This has kind of been back and forth. What will we do? We need to look at the origins of this virus. At the end of the day, why won't China just simply let the people in? It just, I don't think the thing was created in a lab, to be very clear. I don't think that. I don't know. I don't think it. But when you do this, what do you want me to think? Like, what do you want me to think? You want me to think it's created in a lab almost. And so is that the play here? Like, we're going to keep the World Health Organization out, and so that everyone gets mad at us, and then we have a common enemy to rally our people around. I don't understand what else it could be.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things to put in mind. Number one is keeping 1.4 billion people just happy enough that they don't revolt. Number one is if the WHO finds out something that shows true incompetence of leadership there, and it somehow gets disseminated through the populace of the PRC, the CCP is going to have an issue. So that's probably one thing that they got to constantly keep contained if there is sort of that incompetence that was going on. And I would say with 99% certainty, there was a lot of incompetence, at least at the local level and funneling it upwards. Number two is if you put your Dr. Evil hat on, I mean, like, just think about the worst motivations and agendas of potential leaders. And just, I'm not saying this is what the CCP is thinking, but I would say if you put on your Dr. Evil hat, there is no reason why China would want to help the rest of the world figure out the real remedy and the real source and the real path forward with this virus. Because right now, if you look at the way their economy grew 2% last year, it's on track to beat most estimates this year, and everybody else is slogging through this. It only plays into this quickening, this amplifying of the rise of China, the same way we've seen amplifying Amazon here, amplifying various tech companies because of COVID. So if you're China, what is the motivation to help people catch back up to you? Like that, I don't see what that motivation is. Now, maybe they're really philanthropic, good-natured leaders in the CCP, and so is Xi Jinping, and he wants to make the world a better place and all that stuff, and we can hope for that. But I don't have like optimism that that's the case.
So I thought about the exposing, getting in there and being exposed. So you can't hide everything, but the CCP has the capacity to go and wipe records clean. And so if they haven't done that by now, it's kind of like, guys, go put the people in jail that you want to put in jail. Like, to me, this is an easy play for them to allow the people in. They could have hidden all the evidence. I'm not supporting that, by the way. I'm just saying they have the power to go do that. People disappear in China all the time. They can delete records. They can change records. So the fact that they're keeping them out, so I agree. Incompetence, bad things happen. I'm all in. The fact that we're a year from now, right? A year ago this time, it was the World Health Organization was talking to them about it. They can't hide the records or manipulate the records. That I have a hard time that's what they're protecting themselves from. It could be. To me, it seems more likely that they're saying the West is coming and they're trying to spread false propaganda. They're coming, and so they're trying to rally themselves internally. And so by pushing the World Health Organization out, the WHO out, they try to rally the troops internally. Now, the question for the West is what value is the World Health Organization if they can't get into China? And that may sound a little critical of them, but I'm saying if you can't get in there, you did cover for them back in the spring of last year. That's not even a disputed fact anymore. What value are they? And then as Americans, how should we think about all this? And that's where it gets kind of tricky, because it's like those are separate issues, but they're all kind of linked together.
Well, let's face it, the WHO, and once again, this will get into weeds that I don't know too much about, but on the surface, the WHO is not just about what happens in China and how do you deal with that. I mean, you have the Ebola crisis in Africa, you have various other things happening around the world. I would argue we do need some sort of organization that works with CDC and various other entities around the world to figure out how to contain things, how to prevent things, how to actually learn from the mistakes made with COVID so that we don't encounter this again. So I don't know if the WHO is the answer or some new rediscovered entity is, but somehow we need to have an organization like that. And if anything has exposed the need for it more than ever, it's COVID.
But let me ask you like this. Do you think that Americans should be demanding that China lets the WHO in?
I mean, I guess in a way, I would go to some of the stuff that you said earlier, which is what is the WHO really going to find out if China's whitewashed a lot of it, right? I mean, if anything, maybe their resources and time and energy is better spent in labs around the world trying to figure out different sort of ways to deal with COVID and how to prevent it moving forward and get the best vaccination process up and running. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I have a feeling, yes, it's going to be hard for them to get real answers on the ground in China.
I agree, but I also think that the fact that China won't let them in, we can take note that there's something about that. They're not just being difficult to be difficult. It's either some kind of propaganda campaign internally, or maybe, as you said, maybe they are trying to just cover up a lot of corruption and mishandling. I don't know, but we should take note of the fact that one day they're going to give $2 billion to everyone globally. The next day they're not letting them in. Like, okay, guys, you can't have it both ways. Okay, so let's talk about. We'll stay in China and then we'll come back to the U.S.
Let's go to the delist relist thing, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I was going to go to the apps, but we can go to delist relist. So, let's talk about that.
We're cogs in the wheel, right? And we're voicing major problems between the U.S. and China and the rest of the world. And I'd like to believe that some of the vocalness that we were a part of, like thousands of others that were going, what the heck just happened? Like, we delisted these PLA infiltrated companies from China on the New York Stock Exchange. That seemed like a great start on top of things that we need to continue doing. And then suddenly it's relisted. Is that all greed and incompetence, or what is that? And thank God everybody went berserk about the thing, because now suddenly the New York Stock Exchange reversed its course and we seem to be back on the right track again. I'm sure there's all kinds of discussions going on again. There's probably a lot of money being lost by various entities and individuals that have huge conflicts of interest in this sort of listing on the New York Stock Exchange. But I'm glad we can check off one win in this potential reset of the relationship.
Yeah, it was a win. I think I agree, and I'm curious how much that was tied up with President Trump's banning of Alipay and WeChat Pay, and I've got the list here of let's see here. It's it's like a half a dozen. I don't know. I had the list. I apologize. Oh, here it is. 6 of them. Yeah. Here we go. So Alipay, Cam Scanner, QQ Wallet, Share Tencent, QQ, VMate, WeChat Pay, and WPS Office. I'm only familiar with a couple of those. I'm not sure about the rest of them. But do you think this was Trump kind of appealing to that national narrative of, hey, we're doing all this funny stuff with the delist, relist. You know what I can do? I can stroke a pen and just block these, at least for now.
Well, first of all, reciprocity is something we completely don't have in the U.S.-China relationship anyway. I mean, most of the apps that we take for granted here in the United States of America aren't even in China. You can't use them beyond the firewall. There's lots of tech companies that have no access to that market. Netflix, for instance, just on the entertainment front, is not allowed access to that market because China's trying to prop up Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba. So reciprocity for that type of behavior here in the United States against Chinese companies I would argue needs to be played as part of the leverage that we have in regards to resetting this relationship. So I'm happy he did it. The motivations behind it are probably, I guess, a little suspect too. I mean, there's some of the apps that you're not familiar with. A lot of those apps are used by Chinese nationals or U.S. citizens with Chinese national family members that are all here in the United States and use those apps to interact with people in the PRC, right? So there's a bit of spite that's involved with this in regards to punishing those people so they can't interact with their family and friends and whoever else in the China market. So I think spite's a little bit of it. I think a little of, hey, these are my last few days, I'm going to make a lot of noise is another one. I don't know what the execution of this all is, right? Like we saw it with TikTok where he mandates it gets shut down, but like, actually, I don't even know what's going on with TikTok. I know my kids are still on it, and I feel like that news story just disappeared out of nowhere. In fact, we should probably cover it one episode. But is that all going to get applied? I should probably check some of my apps and see if they're still working. But the bottom line is reciprocity is something we need to explore with everything. In fact, go back to Bill Bishop again, who talks quite a bit about this tit for tat with journalists between the U.S. and China. They kick out ours, we kick out some of theirs. But one of the craziest parts about it is the fact that they've kicked out full platforms or never allowed full press platforms into their country, whereas we allow them to have all their platforms available here, from the Global Times, the China Daily, to you name it. They can have them here. So that's a weird one too. So if we just approach reciprocity even at a 10% of the problem level, I think we can rectify a lot of the relationship pretty quickly.
Yeah, I just pulled up WeChat real quick, and I don't use WeChat Pay, but my WeChat loaded up, and people have been posting stuff today, so at least that part is functional. I don't use
Did
WeChat
you get rid
Pay.
of WeChat overall, or just WeChat Pay?
WeChat Pay, but I don't know if that's tied in inside the app or is that a separate app. I've never used the pay functionality.
I think WeChat Pay is a spite move. Now, by the way, I like the idea of getting rid of these apps because we're not getting access to that market anyway. But WeChat Pay, I think, is purely a Chinese national, heavily used app. So it doesn't really affect mainstream America. In fact, if we're talking to 99% of Americans as populists here on China, this one is not going to affect you. But the overall idea of blocking apps from China into this market is a key ingredient to resetting the relationship.
It would be like blocking the Cash App or PayPal for us, something like that, where we couldn't have access to that. That's except for in China, you can literally pull your phone out and get everything on the QR scan. So, like, it's like the Cash App or PayPal times 1,000 for how far the penetration is. Okay, you are right though on the apps. That is an important thing to remember is that anytime that we delist or block or ban, it's a very small fraction. If you go back to our story yesterday, I believe it was about the NBA and Twitter. Always remember that most people in China can't access Twitter, so they have no idea what we're saying about them. And so, when you read those stories, it's really weird. It's like, China's mad about you saying something on Twitter. It's like no one over there knows. So,
and by the way, that's a huge part of the Mulan controversy, where just allowing Disney to apologize and say they don't condone what's happening in the Xinjiang province could have been an easy corporate message to give inside America and around the world to alleviate a lot of the strain that was being put on the company for being completely hypocritical. You could argue the same thing with the Daryl Morey tweet. If the NBA just came out and said, we support Hong Kong protests, we support the right to democracy, blah, 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 and they got to do that, that would have taken a lot of the pressure and alleviated the hypocrisy sort of message that was going on at the time. And China simply could have just blocked all of that from ever getting to their populace, right? Instead, they make a huge deal of it, and it becomes a geopolitical issue that could have easily been a tempest in a teapot.
China acts like a scorned lover. That's kind of how best to describe them. Everything you say is blown out of proportion, and you don't want to see him around the holidays sometimes. So,
Well, I've been happily married for a long, long time, and I'm glad I've never really had a scorned lover, but I've had friends that have had them, and I think that's a great metaphor for it all.
okay, last story we'll hit quickly. We do have a presidential change coming here in 2 weeks, I guess, roughly. The Biden administration is coming over, and I'm trying to pull this piece up here, I believe, from Newsweek. Yeah, Newsweek. This is Communist China is preparing to eat Joe Biden's lunch. And just a couple things here. There was a narrative that Beijing was afraid of Biden. That narrative has to be put to the facts on the ground now. Since the election's done, China has not slowed down. They've only ramped up. They're striking deals with the EU. They're doing all of these things that if they're really scared of Biden, they're really digging a deep hole. And so whatever you think about a right-left issue here, their actions are not indicative of someone who's scared of Biden. I think we can put that whole narrative to rest.
Yeah, it's a weird sort of hypocrisy and strangeness that I still am having a hard time deciphering myself, and it's why I'm so pushing this idea of being a nonpartisan patriot, because the Democrats should be thoroughly standing for the rights of people to protest, the freedom of speech rights, the ability to have freedom of creativity, the ability to have the rights of humans and to be treated the right way and not have human rights issues abused. They should be standing firm with the middle class and the majority of this country and look at how we've been enabling China to sort of decimate that middle layer of our society in so many different ways. And then, of course, there's national security issues that both the right and the left have major sort of pressure points on. I don't understand to this day how the Democratic Party feels like they can either avoid confrontation with China, avoid applying pressure. It just seems weird to me, because it would seem like if there was one party over the other that would take a harder stance on China, I would think it should be Democrats. But for some reason, that's not the case. And I'm hoping that changes. I'm hoping, like in my book and the way I talk about things, like a light went on in my head. I realized, oh my God, I believed in one thing that was really bad for America overall. I saw the light, and now I'm pushing and voicing and hoping that I can influence others to try to change course. I am optimistic in a pessimistic kind of way that the Democrats have that same light bulb go off in their head. Like, that's sort of the only way we'll get there, is for people to see the light and go, oh my God, we have to fix this. We have to think about things differently, and we need to apply the pressures in order to do it.
Yeah, I think you had the quote from Bill Bishop earlier about Hong Kong?
Yeah.
Can you read that to us again?
Yeah, it's a great quote.
It's a great quote.
And why wouldn't the CCP encroach on Hong Kong in the way they did last night was sort of how he started it. He said there's no price to pay. Merkel and the EU don't care, and even if they did care, there is little they can do. The U.S. has applied basically toothless sanctions. It is a PR city, meaning Hong Kong, just like Shenzhen and Guangzhou, but with a convertible currency. Grim times.
What can Biden do to change that? If you can't get the EU and Merkel, they have the news. They know Biden's coming in. Biden's been around for 50 years. Everyone knows they signed this deal despite Joe Biden coming in. They don't care about Joe Biden or what he's going to do. Joe Biden isn't going to do anything. And I'm not saying that Trump did the right thing either necessarily. I'm just simply saying I think Americans have to realize is that if you want to put pressure on China, you have to be, there's certain principles that I'm not willing to bargain with, but there are things that we can do and things to think about it. But I think we have to get away from this narrative of Trump's going to fix China, Biden's going to fix China, Tulsi Gabbard, whoever, they're going to fix China, because it is a very complex problem. How he handles very complex. But Biden, I don't think he has the political capital, and I think the world has already spoken before he's gotten in office. And so I think Bill Bishop hit it on the head, and I think the same thing will be true when Biden takes over in just a few weeks or months at the road. I can't see Anything of substance?
I'll say that Biden will have the political capital if we, along with all the others voicing this challenge that the CCP poses on America and the fact that we do have a ticking clock, the more we educate and engage people on this conversation, the more they get excited about it in a passionate, we need to change kind of way, that will build political capital so that Joe Biden will be forced to take action. Congress will be forced to take action. But if we just sit back, the sort of populist side of this equation, and allow, as you were talking about the other day, the elites with influence, not all elites are bad. It's like that's not the case. But the people with influence in this conflicted relationship continue to do what they do because there's so much money to be made. The 99% of us will be left out of that. And that is a problem that we can only address if people start talking about it and start pressuring their leaders.
Okay. We will wrap it up with those eloquent words from you, Chris. Podcast is now out. Apple, Spotify, should be everywhere. If not, it would be on your favorite platform in a day or two. Probably not in China. However, if Xi Jinping wants to come on the show and put it in China, we'll be happy to have him on. If Joe Biden wants to come on the show, we'll be happy to have him on. And so we'll be back maybe, what's today, Wednesday, maybe tomorrow. Probably get one more show in at least before the week's out, if I had to guess, as the news is churning over, it feels like on an hourly basis almost now. So, Chris, anything else before we get out of here?
No, that's it. Everybody have a great day. Thanks for watching or listening. And please keep the China discussion out there. Be vocal about it. Let's keep pressing the issue.